Susie's here.
I can't hear you.
Put in your hearing aids. Move on.
You
Put
want
your
borrow
hearing
one?
aids out of your pocket.
That'll be here. Thank Jane for the treats this morning. Esther and Ann for the coffee. Cliff is teacher today. Next week, treats are Templeman's. And we need a teacher. I thought there was one on here, but it's disappeared, so pass this around.
I'd do it, but I'm gonna be out of town.
That's no excuse.
For the next Sunday.
Forget it.
Be a teacher for next Sunday and the last 2 Sundays of the month. July 25th, we're making sandwiches for Open Door. Start around the list. Sign up to help and make cookies. I signed up Jackie to make cookies. I hope I don't get shot. She had dental surgery Friday and is not
Ooh,
real happy right now.
I'm sorry.
But she's doing better.
How I wrote that, sir.
Pardon?
Yes, sir.
Will do.
Sir, you were great.
Are the cookies for the 25th also?
Yes.
yes.
Yeah, the cookies need to be here about 9 o'clock. They'll be bagged up and put in the lunches.
Nice if they can bag them before they come.
Okay, how many in a bag? 2?
We put 2 per bag.
2 per bag. Except for my lunch, I get 3. I'm
Write
going
that on my
home.
Are
calendar.
you two gonna help carry it down there?
If you want to.
Okay.
Any other announcements? According to the treasurer, we should have enough to cover this. If we don't,
We'll figure it out.
we'll figure it out.
I have an announcement, okay?
Yes,
In case anybody drives down through our part of the town and sees for sale sign in front of the house, we are selling our house. So, if anybody wants a house, well, let me know. We are moving to Shepherd's Crossing on 45th and Woodlawn.
That's
Good.
County Care Center area.
well, welcome to Bel Air. We'll appreciate you helping us with our taxes.
Are you actually in Bel Air?
Pardon? Yeah.
Yes.
We will be in independent housing. We are not going to assisted living, which people keep thinking we are. No. We'll have our own house.
Okay.
We can eat there if we want. Yeah.
You are selling your house. You will carry financing with 0 down, correct?
It's okay to talk to yourself, just a little.
Come and get it.
Pardon?
Come and get it.
We've already had people go through before they got the key box in the door, so I hope that's music.
That sounds like a good sign.
Just so you're not moving out of town.
Right.
We thought about it.
We're out of state. I heard that rumor, and I'm glad to.
Well, like I said, it kind of happened suddenly, and I didn't want people to start rumors and all that, so we're staying in Kansas.
Glad you are. Joyce, I stopped by and saw Olive and Theo yesterday. Olive has her cast off. She has a walking boot on. She's getting around, not stuck in bed now, doing much better. Theo has had his test. Expect us to get the results in a week or so. I will not speculate on what they think the problem is, but the doctors have told him that based upon preliminary analysis, it's something that can be controlled by drugs. So let's keep Theo Olive in our prayers. Other joys.
Anyone else?
I'm here.
Welcome.
Well, there's a joy, and you can pray for them. The kids, I guess, left at 5:15. I've been with my granddaughter, so I was up at 4:45 this morning seeing them. And they're going to a mission in Purdue University for the youth rally, and I think that's real exciting. There's supposed to be about 60 of them.
Yes, the kids left this morning, and the Boy Scouts left this morning. And kids left for summer camp. So there's a mass exodus. Cliff?
I have a joy, the Royals beat the Tigers.
I beg your
What was the
pardon.
score, Ann?
13-6. That's the only one we're gonna let them have.
Enough of politics. We have 2 birthdays today. Ann, your birthday's Monday, correct?
The
11th.
13th, Wednesday.
13th?
13th, Wednesday.
I'm sorry, I had it at 11.
And
No.
my son, who turned 50 today.
Uh-oh. Shall we sing happy birthday to Ann?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, since we're all warmed up, the 15th is Jerry's birthday, Friday.
Happy birthday, dear Jerry. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and
How old are you gonna be, Jerry?
he can't hear, he doesn't have a hearing aid.
Wanda, how old is he going to be?
What? Old 25, better.
49.
79, I think.
1 more year will
79.
be a milestone.
79, and you're 70. I thought.
On a sad note, those of you who haven't heard, Elizabeth Hamilton passed away this morning, shortly after 8. Service will be Norton,
Kansas.
Friday.
I don't know when, all I know is I heard it's in
Okay.
Norton.
Okay.
I have Don's friend Hayward passed away this week. So
Yes, we've been praying for him for a
remember
while.
his family.
Other concerns, prayer concerns.
And for my brother Don, his kidney biopsy was cancerous, and so the 18th they'll let him know what they can do. He's 88, so it's going to be a real concern.
Two golfing friends that are fighting cancer, Christy and Sherry.
Let's keep them in our prayers. Other concerns?
My concern is that I'm the mother of a 50-year-old boy today. Feel very old.
I'm looking for a younger woman.
Pray for my son-in-law too. He's on his trip to India, so
That's where they go. India. So is
for 3 weeks.
Cliff's
Yeah, they're all gone.
Cliff's son is going to India.
Is he?
Doctors Without Borders.
No, it's, they're having a medical convention in India and they're asking him to speak.
Gene, how's Don doing?
He's doing well, thank you.
That's
He's
good.
just about finished up with physical therapy and walking a little slowly, but he's getting around fine.
That's good. Other concerns? Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
Our most Heavenly Father, it's with sadness and joy that we ask you to welcome our sister Elizabeth, your daughter, into your house and table. We know you'll greet her with open arms. We ask you to welcome our friends and neighbors who want to join you also. We thank you for our bountiful blessings and the joys of life that we have. We ask you to keep those who are ill and hurting in your hands. help them through their troubles. Ask you to be with us in this coming week, keep us safe, help us do your will. Ask you to be with our families, guide them, guard them, help them be of service to you. I ask these things in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. And Mr. Templeman, are you ready?
I am.
And do we need to pass the calendar around here?
Yes.
Yes.
Some of us who belong to Grace Med Guild want to announce that we have tickets for sale for the Heartland Men's Chorus that will be performing on Saturday and Sunday. The 17th and 18th. So if you're interested in tickets, you can $18 and hymn songs and gospel at the Plymouth Congregational Church, the 23rd and the 24th of for Saturday, the 23rd, 23rd and 24th of July. So if anybody is interested, we need to turn them back in tomorrow, so let one of us know if you'd like tickets.
Okay. Did everybody hear Edmund?
I didn't hear.
Tickets to the
Heartland of America,
Oh, okay, all right.
Men's Chorus. It's a large group and they have a good performance.
That's the 24th and 25th?
23rd, 24th.
23rd and 24th, Saturday and Sunday. And the concert is at Congregational Church. Okay.
Grace Med gets $3 off of every ticket we sell in their
Okay.
Some of you may have heard, I just had a call. Oh, there it is again. Yes, I'll have to answer it. Well, it's from the land of Canaan, from Jericho. It's 8 a.m. Monday morning there. And the year is 12,000 BC. I didn't know they had phones. Thank you, Dixie, for your help with that. But it's a text message. I'm being texted. That's spelled with a T. It's, the report is that Joshua has died. He was 110 years old. And he's not appointed a leader for the Israeli tribes, nor has God appointed a leader. So that gets us started with our lesson today, and that's rather ominous that there's no leader now, and Joshua has been a good leader. They're still trying to establish themselves in the land of Canaan. Sometimes there's battles, sometimes they move in and are assimilated into the communities. And along with that, they are departing from God because they begin to worship Baal, one of the Canaanite gods, and because they're becoming farmers for the first time and they need rain on their crops, they pray to Baal for God. So things are in bad shape. And there's an opening prayer that the lesson book has recommended, and I think under those circumstances we ought to pay attention to this prayer. Loving God, open our eyes and ears today that we may indeed encounter you, the living God, through your scriptures. Help us to love and serve you with all that we are, so that we may fully live as your witnesses in the world. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Now, I'm going to continue on with the introduction I've been telling you about with the new circumstances of the Israeli tribes in the land of Canaan. And I mentioned that they're beginning to adopt the gods that were in Canaan, and God has forsaken them because of that. And there's some battles they've gotten into, and they lost a lot of Israeli warriors. God was not with them, and their suffering was terrible, and the loss was terrible. and things are not going well, and God's punishment is harsh. So they're lamenting and moaning and groaning, and God hears them. God has not departed from them. They have departed from God. But God hears their moaning and groaning. And so he appoints a judge. And that brings us into our lesson about the book of Judges. And there were 12 judges over a period of some 320 years. 6 are mentioned in the book of Judges in the Bible. And it's a circumstance where the Israelis are having a lot of trouble now. Not only has Joshua died, but the tribes have become separated as they've occupied the land of Canaan. And this has caused geographical separation. There are valleys and hills and mountains, and the different tribes have located in those different places, and they become apart from each other. They're not the unified group they were when they first went in. And that adds to the problems of their being assimilated by the Canaanite faith and religion, pagan gods that they are praying to. It puts them apart from that. In addition, they are suffering from the fact that there's 3 foreign tribes that they have attacked them from the west, and the Philistines, who are a coastal tribe over the mountains to the east, or to the west, I'm sorry, and the other 3 tribes attacked from the east on the other side of Jordan. So they're having all these people to contend with. And in some ways, that helps the Israeli tribes unite again to fight off these foreign invaders and foreign warriors. And they are not agricultural people, these foreigners. They're wandering nomads, and they're very opportunistic, and they like to move in and get some of the milk and honey that the industrious Israelis have been growing and developing in the land of Canaan. So we find all these troubles. The one good thing that's come about it is even though the Israeli tribes sometimes fight each other over land and other issues, they do unite when these outsiders come in. It's sort of like a family. The family will fight viciously among itself, or let an outsider come in and attack, and they all join in unity and go back and fight these outside intruders. This is repeated over and over. It just seems amazing to me that there are so many problems. I thought that last week we had, as we finished Joshua, and they had begun to settle in, and some of the bad things that were going on for the Israeli tribes were ended. And now they could begin to live in peace and develop a productive community and happy times under their God. But that isn't the case at all. And they have fallen away from their faith, and repeatedly they fall away from their faith. They get in all sorts of trouble, all sorts of wars, and they moan and lament about it, and God comes and appoints a judge. The judge isn't really, as we think of a judge today, one who looks at justice and evaluates the law and makes decisions. He is a spiritual leader. And of the 12 they appoint just over again. They get in trouble, they appoint the judge. The judge either dies or the people depart from him. And so over and over again. And circumstances are horrible. We'll find that out as we read further in the book of Judges. There's a couple of chapters, 19 through 21, that tells about the tribe of the Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin. They call them the Benjaminites. And they have all sorts of trouble, and they get into a battle with one of the other Israeli tribes, and they take all their women, and then they try to put this thing back together, and they're very underhanded in the way they do this. The other tribes make an arrangement, and they steal 400 virgin women, so that this Israelis who have been deprived, the Benjamites who have been deprived of all their women, will be able to continue as a race. They'll have women, they can reproduce, and they get into all of that. Just incredibly undesirable things that are done by the Israelites, and it just gets very deplorable as we go along. I want to set that background for you, so let's pay attention now and go to the verses that are in the Bible. And Pat, I'd like you to start out and just read it for a while, and then Viola, if you and Don and the others will pick up, and we'll read through all the verses starting at verse 11, page 39.
Then the Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and worshipped the Baals. And they abandoned the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They followed other gods from among the gods of the peoples who were all around them, and bowed down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger.
They abandoned the Lord and worshipped Baal and the Astartes. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he gave them over to plunderers who plundered them, and he sold them into the power of their enemies all around, so that they could no longer withstand their enemies. Whenever they marched out, the hand of the Lord was against them to bring misfortune, as the Lord had warned them and sworn to them, and they were in great distress.
Then the Lord raised up judges, and delivered them out of the power of those who plundered them. And yet they did not listen even to their judges, for they lusted after other gods, and bowed down unto them. Soon they turned aside the way in which their ancestors had walked, who had obeyed the commandments of the Lord, and they did not follow their example.
Wherever the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge, and he delivered them from the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord would be moved to pity by their groaning because of those who persecuted and oppressed them.
But whenever the judge died, they would relapse and behave worse than their ancestors, following other gods, worshiping them and bowing down to them. They would not drop any of their practices or their stubborn ways.
And the key verse is, they did not listen even to their judges, for they lusted after other gods and bowed down to them. This just is very disappointing and deplorable news, that instead of getting better in the promised land, it seems to me they're getting worse. Has anybody got any thoughts about that? How does this strike you? What is your reaction to it?
They're being human, I guess.
Being human.
I wonder if they'd gone ahead and completed the scorched earth policy when they first came in, as the Lord asked them to do. Would it be different then?
Yeah.
What was that, Don? I didn't understand.
Well, when they moved in, they were to kill all the people above, but they didn't do it.
Oh, okay. Oh, they didn't do it.
Yeah, we've had that discussion several Sundays, that some people think it's awful that they went in and they did kill the people in Jericho, but as they went into the land of Canaan, they either got tired of fighting or had all the loot they wanted or whatever and went home, and did not destroy the people of the land.
Right.
And so they disobeyed God right off the get-go, and then they just got worse and worse.
Now, that always shocks me, but it's over and over again in the Bible. God is a very demanding and very tough God. To think that he would direct his people to destroy and kill other peoples. But maybe someday we'll understand what God's all about. What is it, the old saying, when we see eye to eye, then we'll understand and things will become clearer. So, but it's just amazing, yet we have to deal with that. That's what the Bible tells us, and I think Don and are exactly right in that they didn't do what they were supposed to do in the beginning. Now they try to
We have to accept that.
bring the lesson, beg your pardon.
I guess we have to accept the Old Testament teaching, but you know, it seems a complete turnaround to the God of the New Testament. And so I think it's hard for people to assimilate all that.
Larry Greenwood makes an interesting observation of that. I heard him in a Bible study one time say that he tried different things. He tried the prophets and the judges and the kings, and none of those things worked. So he became man himself and sacrificed himself for our salvation. And that, thank you, and that was a remarkable event. And since then, according to Larry, God hasn't had to do anything else, and indeed God hasn't done anything else. So he finally, as Larry put it, figured out what he needed to do to deal with these terrible people that he created. An interesting concept.
You know, there was a quote, I think in one of the newspapers, because we get the Wall Street Journal, so I'm not sure where it was, and some Arab had the nerve to say, the Jews will never want peace, and I thought, and what about you?
Yeah.
What about you all?
Now, that's an interesting concept. Would you say that again?
Okay. An Arab announced and was quoted in the paper that the Jews do not want peace. I thought, neither do you, dear.
Yeah.
There you are.
Yeah.
What a nervy thing to say.
Yeah.
But I think what you and Jane made a good point. Think of what it took for God to get things right, because not that he was getting it wrong, we were getting it wrong. Think of the love he had to give his only son. How many of us would want to give up our sons, our 50-year-old son?
Well, there have been times with my son too.
But like you said, he tried this, and he was trying to get a people that would worship him and spread his word. It wasn't that he wanted them just a little group for himself. He wanted them to tell others about him while they didn't do it. And the prophets tried to tell him, and he worked through everything he could, and then he had enough love to give his only son. That should give us a better feeling about the God of the Old Testament.
I remember the first time that it occurred to me that that's really what God had done. I thought maybe when I was younger that Jesus had been attacked by mobs and they killed him. But when it became apparent to me one day, I was sitting in church and listening to the verses being read or the preacher, it became obvious to me that God had sacrificed his own son. And that just grabbed me. I just couldn't understand that. Of course, I've thought a lot about it since then. And it's still frightening, discouraging concept, but I think you have it absolutely right, Viola, that he did it out of love. And yet, if they didn't follow him, he was a pretty mean God, as these scriptures.
And look what we're doing today. We've taken God out of schools. It's almost out of government. And it seems like we're doing like the Israelites did.
How can you take God out of the schools? I don't quite understand that. Could
Well, you
explain?
can't say a prayer. You can't.
I think
yeah, you can.
Is there any place, I'll bet you any amount of money, I can say a prayer, any school, anytime, if they'll let me in the school, anytime.
That's true, but she means
What
that
I mean, though-
officially,
We can't say it out loud.
yeah.
But I don't like that sucker coming over the internet and giving that kind of prayer. Because that was a bad prayer for my kids to hear. I don't want them to hear that kind of prayer.
It's like they've taken the Pledge of Allegiance out and everything like that, so.
No, they're not.
They
Sorry.
sat out of the schools my kids went to.
Well,
They
then,
don't let them use the God in there, though, anymore with the Pledge of Allegiance.
well, I can pray in any room, and sometimes I was glad that the prayers didn't work when I was giving a test.
I remember when we lived in Kansas City and our kids were going to Shawnee Mission East, Interesting. Shawnee Mission East was a pretty heavily Jewish school, and that decree came down somewhere that you weren't supposed to pray in schools. That was the thing in Kansas City, at least, Charles. You weren't supposed to pray in the schools, but we would go to PTA meetings, and they had a PA system, and we ended up in the classrooms where our kids were in classes. And first thing they did over the PA system was open the meeting, whole session with a prayer. They didn't pay attention to that. They went ahead and did it. And as far as taking God out of the schools in the early days, after the revolutionary times, when schools were first established in America, the Bible was the text. And they studied their English from the words in the Bible, and English, as I understand it, is very correct in the Bible. Punctuation and everything else, with the exception of today's lesson. And you have your Bible there. I'm going to prove this. This is just an interesting aside.
I taught also you can offer, I taught a 3-hour course in a public school. I produced it, directed it, and hired the teachers to teach the class on the history of the Bible. And I broadcast it over cable television. It's perfectly possible to do that. It's perfectly possible to offer a history class on religion in schools. This idea that religion is taken out of schools, I can't buy it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
No, it's history.
What?
It's his story, history. It's history.
And I produced it and directed it and offered a 3-hour college class in it.
Presented as history.
That was a long time ago, Charles.
But it still can be done. It still can be done.
But it's not being done properly in every school, in the information I read about. They have neglected some of the history. It's not necessarily religious history, but they've neglected some of the history. There was one comment made that Lincoln was only mentioned in a few short paragraphs in one history book. And I think we've got an element in our society that has gotten control of courses that are, the books that are written for education in high school, and has circumvented things. But we need to move away from this, Charles. We may have different opinions of it, but we need to move away from this.
I'll keep my mouth shut.
And I won't contend it anymore, but we'll come back.
Well, Cliff, and you know, the other side of this, taking it out of schools, is when they're teaching what we would feel the wrong side of the Bible, yeah, we want it out of the schools. You know?
That's right.
And that's when it was good, and that's when our minister pointed out. I can remember to the people and the kids pointed out that there can be false gods taught.
Yeah.
And that's one of the good reasons probably that it's taken out of the schools.
I remember when I was in high school, in my little town, we had 3 churches in town: a Catholic church, a Methodist church, and a Brethren church. And every Monday morning, we had one large assembly in high school where all 4 classes would come and join, and then we would depart to different classrooms for the various classes and what was being taught. But every Monday morning, all together, 9th through 12th grade, would assemble, and the ministers and the priest would come in and talk for 15 or 20 minutes. And it was an interesting time. And it was interesting to me that the one I enjoyed the most was the priest. He seemed to be the better educated, and the things he said were important, and he was a good speaker, a good presenter, and I can't remember what most any of them said, but we did that in the school. So you're right in many ways, Charles, that religion was strong in the schools in those days. I want to go on to some questions that relate back to the verses we just read. on page 41, under Living the Faith, in bold print in the first paragraph, it says, after the death of Joshua, the Israelites inquired of the Lord, who shall go up first for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? And they still seem to be connected to the Lord at that time, but they departed. And all of these terrible things happened. And as we get over on page 43, there's a tragic pattern. And at the end of that, on the next page, the question is, in my critique here, a fair assessment of Christians in America, how would you compare yourself to this assessment? Has anybody read that section? Could you comment on that? Let me read the first paragraph on the top of page 44. Again, many modern Christians are not so different. We worship the God of the Bible, but we also worship our cars, our houses, the latest electronic device, and our favorite football team. Guilty. No wonder one church put on its sign, the saints win here every Sunday. Much too often we put these things before God. And the thought occurred to me as we went through this as to whether we're following God properly or not today, is that every 4 years the Methodist Church has what I think is called the General Conference. And all the bishops meet, and I think the foreign Methodist Church bishops come to this country and meet. And it's interesting, they allot the membership in this according to the members in the congregations. And some African nations and South Korea have such increased numbers of Methodism that they have more representatives now to the General Conference than Americans have. Their churches, their Methodist churches, are doing better than ours. But more than that, and here's where I wonder, and I say this with the background of many people saying they think that the Methodist Church today is a sleeping giant, that it has the power and the ability and the principles to do many great things in the world. Yet at our General Conference, when they get on the issue of homosexuality, and I don't want to bring up the subject of homosexuality, but it's only to demonstrate where we might be departing from God. When they bring that issue up, it's defeated, and the Methodists stand for the biblical interpretation of that subject, that problem. Yet we have something like 23 bishops who will come in and have a protest and stop the proceedings while they protest and want to be in the favor of liberalizing the church's stand on this issue. And one of them was our former bishop here, Bishop Muti, and I have compassion for that man because he had 2 sons, both died of AIDS, and that might be a hard pill for any of us to swallow. But nonetheless, there it is. We are not following God according to the Bible and the Scriptures with what's going on in our General Conference, and not only on that issue, but on other issues as well. Does anyone have any feelings about that?
You know, I think the gay community, the homosexuals are, I'm trying to look at this from a civil point of view. And they want the civil rights that heterosexual marriages have. Now that's not looking at it from a biblical sense, but I think you have to understand there are many homosexuals, probably a lot, very many, that are Christian. But I think they're looking at some of these rights things from a civil point of view. I was raised in a Lutheran church in a small town in Iowa that was very much, this is your religion, this is your schools, this is your secular life, this is your religious life. And I was kind of raised that way as a separation. And like someone said, it could creep in, well, I understand what you're saying, Bonnie, about the religion out of schools, which is not good, but also there could be a type of religion that could offend people. But I think as Christians, we can lead a Christian life in the secular world. You know,
Well, my daughter was sent home from school for saying a prayer with another child in Heights High School.
and I think that seems extreme.
And it just, this has been several years ago when my youngest daughter was alive. And it just seems to me that her rights were taken away from her, you know, to be able to pray with another child.
And that's where it gets so testy, doesn't it? You know, this is the kind of thing, so if we could just separate it. I don't know. I don't know the answer.
Thank you all for those viewpoints. Now I want to make a rather major departure from the lesson book, and I have handouts here. And this is an article, and the question is, you'll see on the back, at the bottom on the back side, discussion questions. I'd like you to look over those discussion questions, because the whole point of this article and the discussion that I intend to come out of it is to answer the question, is Israel today being favored by God and supported by God, as opposed to the Israel in the time of the judges? I will quickly review and summarize this article for you by reading a few highlighted passages out of it. In the second paragraph on the first page, this statement is made. Israel cruised through the recent global slump with scarcely a down quarter and no deficits or stimulus package. It is steadily increasing its global supremacy behind only the U.S. in an array of leading-edge technologies. It is the global master of microchip design, network, algorithms, and medical instruments. Amazing.
What kind of government do they, is that a democracy?
Amazing. I think it is, yeah.
I thought it was a dictator.
I don't know, so I can't remember.
No, they elect.
Yeah.
They elect
How?
their leaders, yeah.
How do they elect, I wonder?
Well, that's amazing. Just let me read the first sentence again. Israel cruised through the recent global slump with scarcely a down quarter and no deficits or stimulus package. Boy, wouldn't Spain, Greece, Ireland, the United States like to be in that kind of a situation? They have a number of things that they've developed. Of course, some of these out of necessity because they're sitting right in the middle with all sides around them of Mideastern Islamic countries that are their enemies that would like to destroy them and do away with them. So they have to do a lot of things to protect themselves, and they've developed a lot of defense mechanisms.
Their kids have to go to war, or excuse me, their kids have to be in the military for 2 years.
Yeah,
It's mandatory.
yeah, well,
So there's probably some mandatory rules there.
it's mandatorily
A lot of
necessary
things.
if they're going to survive as a nation in their setting. You talk about the Iron Dome in the second paragraph. It reduces the weight and the cost of interceptors, and that's little drones they can keep in the air for days at a time and surveil and see if anyone's massing armaments or planning against them. I'd like to go down to the last phrase in the fourth paragraph. It says, Israel raised its exports 19.9% in 2010's fourth quarter and up to 27.3% in the first quarter of 2011. Now they're having great economic success, is what that says. In the next paragraph, Israel supplies Intel, Cisco, Apple, and Microsoft with many of their critical designs and parts. Amazing.
They're competing with China.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not.
Does your stockbroker sell stock there?
Beg your pardon?
Does your stockbroker have some things to sell there? I'd like to buy into that.
Yeah, buy in Israel, right, yeah.
About
Yeah.
4 years ago, my son-in-law went over there with his company to Israel.
And then, of course, they went to India. Now, they set up their company in India, but they never did in Israel. And, you know, I don't know really what the reason was. But they never started their company over there.
Well, they might be
So
subject
they
to
probably
incoming,
weren't even needed.
they might be subject to incoming missiles on their factories in Israel. That might be one good reason.
But they went over there to Israel. He was in Israel, look it over.
Are we saying that they're so successful because they're God's people?
Say that again, please.
Are we saying that they're so successful because they're God's people?
That's the question. Yes.
All right, who's correct?
I beg your pardon?
Whose people are China?
Whose people are
China.
China? Yes. Yes, that's a good point. That's a good point. However, my understanding is there are many Christians in China.
There are probably many in Israel. You know, they have those kibbutzes. A lot of people like that idea.
There's even organizations called Jews for Jesus.
Yes, there's a neighbor of mine. who was-
That's another scary thing. I have a great nephew that went over to China to do some school. Well, he has stayed there. And he has to come back and finish 6 weeks here or something in college. And I asked him, well, now what are you training? What are you going to do? He says, I'm going to take care of my stocks when I graduate. He has gone over to China and made all this money. 22 years old.
China is booming.
What's his name?
We
And
show,
he's Jewish.
is he Jewish?
Yes, he is. Yes, his father was Jewish. My niece was Methodist. My nephew-in-law is Jewish, and 5 years ago, 6 years ago, at a family reunion, why we voted this nephew-in-law the chosen one, because he was always, I'm not kidding you, he did, us women especially, he was always there to help someone. He was, talk about being good. I don't know, you'd have something to do and he'd be there to help you, and the elderly.
Not to apply a stereotypical picture of the Hebrew people, but I think they have always been economically quite successhousful in many areas.
Yes, and there's an interesting reason given in one article I read of why that's happened. And that is because throughout the ages they were never allowed to own land. So they had to become merchants to support themselves, and that was a lucrative field, and they did a good job of it. You had a question, Jim?
Well, my first thought in glancing at this, and obviously I certainly don't know all of the implications, was, and then on the back there's a paragraph that kind of supports that. It's about the paragraph that starts, for the U.S. moving on into sober recognition that Israel's not too large but too small. It boasts a booming economy, still absorbing overseas investments, and which was my first thought as I glanced at this. To my knowledge, as this is comparing this, I think, to some extent to the U.S. economy and what's happening here, to my knowledge, and I'm certainly may not know, Israel is focused inward as far as its military investments, its supporting itself and all. And you compare that to the United States, who has been a world policeman, if you will. You think of the money we've sent outward. If you're comparing with this country, I have a feeling that might be an interesting comparison. Because to my knowledge, is Israel, it would seem they're taking care of themselves, where we seem to want to take care of the whole world.
That's a really good point. Very good point, Jane.
Why don't you read that paragraph to us to put it in better focus for us?
Well, it's just the first part of that. It's talking, it's going into the land, but the first part of it said Israel boosts a booming economy, still absorbing overseas investments and a substantial net inflow of immigrants. And it's talking about their land needs. And it's talking about, then later on, that, you know, it's saying that we're depending on the ever-growing economic and technological power of Israel. And I'm just thinking in terms of, where is our money going? I mean, where it appears to me that Israel is focusing, keeping its investments internally, plus drawing from the U.S. and all these other countries, where we tend to be an outward. I'm not saying one's bad or good, but, you know.
That's a Christian concept.
Sure.
Versus the Jewish concept.
Yep.
And look at the variety of people that we deal with in this country. You know, look at the vulgarities in our country. How can you compare our country to that one? And saying there's such an economical success, it's like comparing oranges to apples.
They live with their enemies.
Beg pardon?
They live with their enemies.
Yeah, they have to. There's a cute little poem at Christmas time that sort of defines in a strange way, but it goes, roses are reddish, violets are bluish. If it weren't for Paul, we'd all be Jewish. Well, maybe many more of us are Jewish than we realize. My daughter has a friend, for his birthday, he wanted a gift that would analyze his DNA. So they took a swab and sent it in to see what his DNA was, and Anne submitted one of her own. Well, the friends at DNA came back, and like most of us, his ancestry was back through North Africa and around through the far Middle East. But Anne came back and she showed a lot of Jewish background in her DNA. So I told Anne, I said, Anne, we'll get a picture taken and send it around at Christmas time, and we'll put the caption under it, Jews for Jesus. Well, nonetheless, I think that we can begin to close this out if we look at the last paragraph. If we stand together, that meaning the United States and Israel, we can deter or defeat any foe. Failure, however, will doom the U.S. and its allies to a long war against ascendant jihadist barbarians with demographics and nuclear weapons on their side and no assurance of victory. We need Israel as much as it needs us. Now, let's come back to the final question that I hope to make us think about. Does God today favor Israel, even if all Jews are not faithful?
Hard to say.
Yeah.
I want to know who this author was.
Is George Gilder. It gives him a...
Who is he?
He's the founder of the Discovery Institute and author of the Israel Test. And, you know, if you want to pursue him further, you can probably pick up his book. This is a Wall Street Journal article, and many times we'll get letters back, even articles back, questioning the position and the principles. And so I promise to you, if, and there will probably be some of this kind of an article, when they come along, I'll make copies of that and distribute it to you to see what the other side has said about this article.
Amen. So, you know, as far as my Jewish relative, it's us accepting and loving him, and he accepting and loving us, love one another. And I guess I'm going to leave it up to the good Lord to be the judge, whether he has accepted Jesus Christ. I can probably sit there and talk all I want, you know, but I can probably show more by being a loving person.
I had an experience in my first days in the Army with a Jewish guy that got put into our outfit after our training had started. And I think they kicked him out wherever he was. He was in trouble there. Well, he got in trouble with us. He was the most obnoxious. He was Jewish. He was the most obnoxious person I'd ever run into. And I think a lot of that came from his religion. And he was the promised one. And he probably came out of an enclave of knowing nothing but Jews. And it was hard for him to accept the rest of us and hard for us to accept him. Well, I treated him I was nice to him, let me put it that way. I didn't try to defend him, but he sure attached himself to me, much to my dismay. And later on, he got in so much trouble that the rest of the guys took him outside and he gave him, what do they call the stiff brush bath in the service? Bristle.
GI bath.
GI bath, yeah. Used GI soap and it was torture. They tortured him. Well, then he got transferred out. And after that, I had a hard time in my life as I came along to begin to accept and think anything of Jews. But I'd like to end up with this thought that I think God really prepared the Israel we have today during the second Exodus when they went to Babylon, and the Babylonians chose only the top tradesmen and leaders out of Jerusalem, out of Israel. They took them to Babylon, and how long were they there? Several generations?
They started coming back after about 70 years.
70?
Somebody stayed.
Yeah, so that's at least 2 generations they were there, and some longer. And what happened is all those intelligent, successful people didn't inbreed, they do what we call line breeding, but they intensified the characteristics that they all had. And among those characteristics was that high intelligence. And there have been some articles even today that show on average that Jews have a higher IQ than other populations do. So God was preparing them, and indeed, they must be the promised people. And perhaps today, Israel is blooming because of that, and certainly